Teachers of Reddit, what was the most obvious teacher crush someone had on you? I had a student who had a rough life. Mom pretty much abandoned him, and Grandma was raising him by pawning him off to family on the weekends. I knew he was going to have a rough life if someone didn't step in and let him know he mattered. He asked me one day how I would know if someone loved me. I jokingly replied that that person would bring me coffee in the morning. A few days later he came into the gym with a huge smile and a cup of gas station coffee. He walked right up and handed it to me along with a bag of creamers and sugars. He said he didn't know how I liked my coffee, so he grabbed one of each. He saved his allowance and asked his grandma to leave for school early so he could stop by the gas station. The next year he brought me a coffee mug so I could remember him when I drank my morning coffee. That kid will always have my heart. When I was playing Hamlet in the school play, and the girl playing Ophelia got stage fright at the last minute, so the drama teacher had to costume up and sub in for her, on her knees in a low-cut bodice, hanging onto my leg, and screaming, "Oh, help him, you sweet heavens." I got a boner in front of 500 people. Not a teacher, but this one girl had such a blatantly huge crush on my film studies teacher when we were 15 or 16. She herself was mixed race and would ask the poor guy if he preferred white chocolate, dark chocolate, or caramel. Winky face. Safe to say that was awkward for everyone present in the room. In the days of MSN, I got a chat invite from someone who had the same last name as me. I assumed it was a relation, but they didn't say anything, and so I left for a bit to eat. I came back and saw a couple more people had been added to the chat and saw they'd been talking about me. I realized they were students because they referred to me as Miss. They were teasing one of the others for his crush on me, and he was defending my massive ass as hot. I taught pre-K, and one student always wanted to be around me and would pretend to slip up and call me Mom. He saw my phone had a screensaver of me and my at the time boyfriend, and he got all mad and said I should break up with him. LOL. Kids are adorable. I doubt he'll remember me in a few years. Working as a substitute teacher, I had a 6th grader hand in a poem that went, "Roses are red, violets are blue, I am single, how about you?" She also worked her phone number into another poem she handed in. I had a crush on my teacher in high school. After I graduated, I asked him out to lunch with my best friend and me. He agreed. We met up a few days later and he walked in with his husband. That was a rough day for me. I was a special needs teacher. There was zero subtlety. One student would constantly try to lift up my skirt. My second year teaching, we had a brand new teaching assistant in the special needs class who was this very outgoing redhead who was very well endowed in the chest area. One student took an instant like to her and was constantly grabbing her boobs. She wore turtlenecks and sweaters most of the year and a lot of scarves. This kid was relentless. She didn't last the full year. I felt really bad for her. She transferred to the elementary school after spring break. Back when I was teaching preschool, 3-year-olds don't do subtle. He always wanted to hold my hand when we went on walks, to sit next to me at circle time, and just to look at me with puppy eyes. It was adorable, but at the same time it was a relief when he grew out of it. Years later, I was teaching an all-boy class at a vocational high school and was lucky enough to get a bright new teacher on a comenius exchange to co-teach the class with me. She was also quite attractive and the boys reacted. Since it was an English language class, I got a kick out of doing my best Mary Poppins impression. "Close your mouth, please, we're not a codfish." I had a kid ask me to marry him the other day. Then he proceeded to say I would be way too old for him by the time he was old enough to get married. I teach at a university and students ask me out. I had a student once ask me out in front of the class while I was teaching, but I think it was more a power move than anything else. Edit bonus story. I'd teach a sexuality class and a student brought up negging. I asked the class for a definition and one dude goes, "You're pretty for a sociologist." The entire class was horrified that he had negged me. Had a teacher in high school who had the same thing happen to her. She looked at the kid and said, "Honey, I teach all day, don't have time to teach at night too." That shut him down pretty quickly. I have a student this year who tells me how pretty my hair is every single day. He's 7. I teach at a local university and I've had a few, including one who used to sketch me during class, one who tried to put his arm around me, etc. The most obvious and persistent was a student who used to follow me after class every day, show up at my office just to talk, and spent all of his time attempting to look down my shirt. He ended up dropping out of college halfway through the semester. I'm not a teacher, but I do have a story of when I was a HS student. It was my senior year and I had a crush on this young history teacher. He would come on model-on trips with us as a chaperone, so he knew who I was. It was my birthday and he heard from a different teacher across the hall. He said, "Happy birthday" to me, and my response was, "Thanks, I'm 18. I blurted it out very quickly and realized literally the second it left my mouth how inappropriate it was. His response, "Well, you can vote now." My first year teaching high school. The AV department made an end-of-the-year tape from the students every year as a keepsake. That year they allowed a senior to profess her love to me on the tape. I didn't know she had done this, and they had allowed it until it played over their AV system to the whole school. Needless to say, I was angry. But I couldn't make too much of a stink because I didn't want a lot of attention drawn to it. And they weren't going to take it out. Effers. I had a student ask me if I was married. Yes. This was followed by, "But are you happily married?" I started teaching way too young. Edit, appreciate the silver and gold. I'm glad to have amused y'all with my awkward moment. I taught preschool and the owner's grandson would tell everyone we were going to get married once he was done with first grade. He even gave me mittens with hearts on them because hearts are for love. He's in middle school now and doesn't remember me. I teach preschool too. It was my last day at a school because I was moving. One of the 4-year-olds announced to everyone that he knew where I was moving. When asked, he explained that Miss Pumpkin Pastice was moving in with him as we were getting married. News to me. This reminds me, when I was 14 I worked for 2 weeks during the summer at this kindergarten, and I swear all the girls had a crush on me. Well, they were 5 at the time, so it makes sense, but one of them was so possessive of me, she kept telling everyone we were gonna get married and took up like 90% of my time there. Eventually we had to have the talk. It's been 6 years, and I still see her occasionally since it's a small town, but she doesn't seem to remember me at all either. Left my computer unlocked and a student put naked pictures of herself as my wallpaper and a post-it with her number. I went straight to the head of department. The student was then brought in and interviewed, and by all accounts was completely casual and okay with it. I did not want to continue teaching her, but due to her subjects another teacher was not an option, so she remained in my class for another 2 years until she graduated. No other instances occurred from there. Was like it never happened. You'd be surprised how many students actually do this kind of thing. Bit of a different one this. Parents' evening, single mum comes in to talk about her son. Her youngest daughter, probably about 4, runs in, jumps on my knee and exclaims, "My mummy says you're going to be our new daddy." Longest parents' evening of my life. She actually handled it really well, just came out with something along the lines of, "Oh, isn't she silly?" Obviously I just tried my best to ignore it and get through the appointment as quickly as possible. I was 24 at the time and the only male teacher in the school, and the first in several years, so I was fairly experienced when it came to dealing with comments made by students. But this one threw me right off. I taught grade 7 and one kid in particular took a liking to me. It wasn't a crush per se. It came across more as an elementary school fascination with the teacher. He would raise his hand constantly during class to answer questions, and when students were doing work he would raise his hand constantly to ask me random questions about my life. He had a few favorite questions like, what song is stuck in your head right now? Or what's your fiancé's name? One time he very excitedly told me he had seen me at Costco, and I hadn't been to Costco that week, so he clearly was seeing me in places I wasn't. During college I was teaching a lesson about money and having a job to kindergartners and opened with, "So how do you guys think I got the money to buy candy?" Small blonde child, because you're cute. Supervising teacher in the back of the room just starts laughing LOL. A student who had a crush on me wrote a straightforward proposition and asked another teacher to deliver it to me. This teacher was a mentor of sorts to the student, so you'd think he'd do something wiser and more responsible than what he actually did, which was deliver the note and threaten me with some form of unspecified violence if I told anyone. So I informed the principal, and both the student and teacher were transferred to other schools. Would you date me if I was older? An 11-year-old in my class. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in college we had a pretty sexy biology professor. Not only was he physically attractive, but he seemed to be a pretty cool person. Most of the women in his classes were pretty smitten, and I won't pretend like I wasn't one of them. However, I went back to college after a few years off, so I was 26 in rooms of 18 to 21-year-olds. 5 years may not seem like a huge difference, but holy shit, it was. His office was connected to the lab, and one day while myself and some other students were doing work in the lab, this one girl was quite loudly proclaiming the things she would do to him, including saying things like, "I don't care if he's married with kids." He was sitting in his office at the time, and I said, "You need to keep your ovaries in check, he can definitely hear you right now." She said she didn't care and she hoped it tempted him. It made me uncomfortable for him. I can't imagine how he must have felt. He usually came out of his office to chat with us or help us, but not that day. Not me, but when I was in school a teacher found another student's very graphic erotic fan fiction about him. Ended up having a conference with her parents, counselor, and principal. Girl got transferred to a different classroom but tried to shoot up the school with what she thought was her brother's secret gun. It was a toy he modified to look real. Hadn't seen or heard about her since, but before I graduated the school made it a rule that staff were not to be depicted in any creative work, and if any such work was found the owner was looking at suspension. My older brother's friend proposed to our 60-plus teacher every day. She always laughed about it. Cue the entire football team picking up on this and proposing to her before every game. For about 3 years. Starting teaching high school English at 21 in the early 90s. Very religious student wrote me an anonymous letter explaining that she believed that God had put her in my class because we were meant to be together. Figured it out by handwriting, reported it. It was last days of the school year before she graduated, so I don't think I ever had to deal with her being in my class again because of finals or something. Not a teacher, a student. Back in middle school, 16 years ago, I had a crush on a teacher of mine, although I wasn't aware of the severity of it until it was too late. Around Halloween time we were supposed to write a poem about a teacher of ours. I, of course, procrastinated until the night before and then realized that I lost the sheet with the contents of what the poem is supposed to be. All I knew was that it had to be about a teacher. So I chose my crush unbeknownst to me. The next day I show up to class and try and turn in my paper where I was informed by my teacher crush that we were going to be reading our poems in front of 2 classes, separated by a sliding wall half the time. As other students read theirs, I quickly realized these poems were supposed to be Halloween-related. I panicked because mine didn't fit the criteria and had nothing to do with Halloween. It wasn't until I was reading mine aloud that I felt the sudden rushing aha moment of what I had just confessed to the entire 2 classes. Both teachers from either side of the wall and the entire student body watched in stupefied horror as I read it aloud, voice and hands shaking. Too late to turn back. It went like this to start. Mr. Hopper, Mr. Hopper, I have a dog named Copper. Mr. Hopper, Mr. Hopper, you make my eyes popper. I don't remember the rest. When I finally looked at Mr. Hopper, his entire face and neck was red with embarrassment. We never spoke of it ever, and I avoided him like the plague. I'm sure it was the same around. I swear the first year I was teaching I passed 2 students in the hall and the one said, "That's the new teacher," and his friend said, "Yeah, he's so hot." Edit. For anyone confused, student 1 was a guy, and the student who said I was hot was a girl. I am a guy. Not a teacher, but I had a crush on a lunch lady while I was in the 1st grade, and I would always say, "Hey, good lookin', what you got cookin'?" She knew what was up. My husband had a male student follow him into the bathroom and tried to catch him at the urinal way too many times. When I was in high school, I saw a handwritten letter on my English teacher's desk while waiting to speak with her. Other kids were hanging around the desk, but I think I was the only one to spot and read the letter. It was sitting among piles of paperwork, partially obscured, but not hidden, so I suspect even the teacher hadn't seen it yet. Paraphrasing, but the letter went something like this. Mrs. S. I love your curves. I can't stop thinking about you. You are my favorite teacher because you have a great smile. I want to touch you and kiss you. There was more, but I didn't pull the letter from the pile to read it because I realized how it would look for the teacher, and I was scared other people would see it. She was my favorite teacher at the time, and I suspected this note was very much not welcome, judging from her personality, very chill, friendly, professional teacher, and the fact that it wasn't hidden. You'd think a teacher-student relationship would be a little less obvious. I never told my friends. I never mentioned it to the teacher. I just kept quiet. I suspected she was the victim here, not the student, and I wasn't about to start any gossip about her, potentially getting her fired. A few years later, another student was kicked out of school for sexually harassing a new art teacher. It was so bad, she had anxiety attacks and sped from the room to a neighboring class to be with another teacher and escape him. He was finally kicked out when he sent her unsolicited d-pics. He got her number without her permission, and she took it to the school board and police. I suspect it was the same kid who wrote the letter, but I have no proof.